Good morning, Alexis.
Morning.
Great to have you back. Matt Lewis is on another leg of the book tour for Too Dumb to Fail. There is a limitless supply of dumbness for Matt to be talking about, so he is in great demand. But you are in demand with the DMZ listenership, viewership. If you read our comments, I regularly get "Bring Alexis back" all the time.
Yeah.
So when we last talked, I think we last talked before South Carolina.
Yeah, I think
So
so. So it's been a
so
while.
my hopes for Jeb had not been crushed yet, and you were spending a lot of time with Jeb. Have you generally been on the trail of the non front runners on the Republican side?
So I'm of the opinion that, to steal a phrase, Michael Lewis wrote this great book called Losers, which is about the '96 campaign.
Oh,
About where he was,
the hardcore version of that is called Trail Fever.
yes, and he was apparently very distressed by that title. There's a whole foreword about how he thought Trail Fever didn't sell and he really wanted to be Losers. Anyways,
But that
his
is an
whole
excellent
theory,
book, by the way.
it's a phenomenal book. And I am of the opinion that he is dead on, that he was assigned to cover the campaign for, I believe, the New Republic. And he started covering it, and he's like, my God, Dole and Clinton are so boring. I want to cover the people who are never in a million years going to be president. He spent all his time with Alan Keyes and Maury, well, I can't think of his last name, but
Maury Taylor.
there you go, Maury Tyler. And that is sort of, I mean, if that were totally my approach to covering politics, that I probably wouldn't have a job. But when I can, I find the front runners slightly less interesting because, like, you know exactly what they're going to say. They're the front runner for a reason. I mean, Trump sort of is the exception to this, but, you know, Cruz, Rubio for a long time, it was like, oh, yes, I've heard this speech 17,000 times. Thank you.
But even Trump's speeches are basically the same every single time.
Oh, yeah. No, they are. They absolutely
So
are.
so with Trump as frontrunner, who is your focus now, Cruz or Kasich?
I've spent most of my time with Kasich just by virtue of how things have shaken out. And he's interesting. I mean, Kasich really is like the only one that Kasich does not say the same thing every time. And Kasich sort of goes off onto these weird, like, tangent dad jokes. Hard to really say what they are. His latest thing when I was in Ohio with him last week was he likes to talk about hitching up the covered wagon and going west. The covered wagon has really made a constant appearance in his speeches all of a sudden. So he's fun. Like, you never know what you're going to get with John Kasich.
So I have a hard time understanding the Kasich logic. He's won one
You're not alone
state.
in that.
Although just before we start, I did see he is contesting Trump in Pennsylvania. He's only behind 3 points.
Yeah.
So perhaps I don't Kasich understands the long game better than I do. But with that notable exception, he has not even placed well in any states, save for Vermont.
Ohio? He won Ohio.
Well, Ohio, his home state. I mean, that's not
Hey,
great
Rubio
shakes.
didn't win his home state.
Yes, he is less pathetic than Rubio. Again, we're clearing very low bars here. But
Yeah, that is true.
Trump is a quasi resident of Florida. So,
Also true. Mar-a-Lago. Apparently, I'm told that at some point, the pilot said, since he only stays at home at night, at some point the pilot said, it will be easier with, like, the winds or the jet streams or whatever. I don't really understand flying. If you fly back to Florida every night instead of flying back to New York, you're more likely to get to your engagements. And so he spends most of his time at Mar-a-Lago. Apparently, everyone on that campaign is very, very tan right now and has been all winter.
But the logic for Kasich to stay in would be that you're trying to hold Trump down below a majority, and if you can't trust Cruz to win one-on-one against Trump everywhere, because Cruz's appeal is fairly limited to evangelicals and southern states. So in the West, he's done well, but he's never really performed well in the Midwest and the Northeast. So you want Kasich to hang around and give Trump a good run for his money there. But that hasn't really happened. He didn't do well in Michigan. He didn't do well in Illinois. He didn't do well in Missouri. He just has this one poll now in Pennsylvania to kind of hang his hat on. And I saw in California, Trump was playing less than 40, and Cruz and Kasich are splitting up the rest, which seems to suggest that Kasich is more a drag on Cruz and a drag on and dividing the anti-Trump vote than he is holding his own in a region somewhere.
Yeah.
But what do the Kasich people say when you get into the weeds with them about the delegate math?
So I think there's two separate arguments for Kasich staying in, and one is the Kasich campaign's argument, and one is the argument that a lot of other people see. So kind of Republicans who are looking to stop Trump, there's a lot of, there has been obviously a lot of angst for Kasich has to get out, Kasich has to get out. And on the other hand, there are some Republicans who are starting to say, okay, we see polls like the one that came out in Pennsylvania this morning where Kasich and Trump are tied and Cruz is far behind, and think there's a place for both Kasich and Cruz if they would just sit down, talk about it, and Cruz says, I'm going to, go crush him in Utah, and Kasich says, great, I'm going to go do that in Pennsylvania, and they stay out of each other's way, and they make sure that, it kind of what happened with Florida and Ohio, that Rubio said, you need to go back, Kasich, in Ohio, because he's the only one who can beat Trump. That they just sit there and they kind of methodically deny Trump delegates. I would say the odds of that happening are very slim, but, this is sort of there are some anti-Trump Republicans who see a place for Kasich in the race. The Kasich campaign's argument is this guy is far and away the most electable in a general election. And I actually think that is potentially true if the other option is Cruz. I think Cruz is not.
Yeah. We're clearing low bars here again.
Yeah, I don't think you sit there and think, oh gosh, Cruz is gonna, walk to the presidency at a general election. I think Cruz is gonna have a terrible time. He's not Trump, but he's certainly not someone that Democrats are gonna suddenly get all warm and fuzzy to, or independents particularly. They haven't in any primaries so far. But so the Kasich campaign theory is he's the most electable, and he is going to he's proven he can win Ohio, he's proven he can win this important swing state, and he's now going to spend the next few months winning delegates and racking up, points, and he will come in probably in third place, and it won't be enough to win it, but no one will have enough to win it, and he will have the best argument because of, A, he's the most electable in the first place, but B, what they said, it's just as important where and when he wins the delegates. So it's not that, it's all well and good that Cruz got delegates in Utah, but Utah's going to go Republican no matter what. And so his theory is, if we can win delegates in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, in California, in all of these mid-Atlantic states where, it's not necessarily going to go Republican, then we can, that they can prove that Kasich is the guy who really can win in a general election. And that could start some coalescing behind him at the convention.
Is there a particular state that they think is their game changer state that they're going to put extra emphasis on? Or because it was sort of odd that he campaigned in Utah, where no one thought he had a prayer, and he didn't have a prayer.
So they thought he had a prayer out there. They thought with Rubio out that there was a chance for Kasich there. That obviously turned out to be mistaken. There was no chance for Kasich there. He barely beat Trump, and Trump, and that is kind of a strategic error that potentially suggests they have a problem, that they don't quite know where he has appeal. They really, my understanding, there's a reason they went to Utah. There's a reason he did 8 events in Utah. There's a reason he spent money and went on air and went on the internet, did digital ads. Is clearly because they thought he had a chance, and he just didn't. And so the question is,
they lack good data?
No, I don't know what they're looking at. I think they're basing it off of where, states like Ohio, where it's kind of a more Pennsylvania clearly will be good for him. He has a personal connection to the state. He was born there. It's a neighboring state. That was the place. I think that's probably the clearest target for them now moving forward, that and he was there the day after Ohio. He went to Pennsylvania. The problem is Pennsylvania is not for a while, and he's got to get through a bunch of other ones before he can even compete in Pennsylvania. And, we'll see. The Wisconsin stuff, I think, is a problem, because he said the way the polls are shaking out would show Cruz and Trump up and Kasich behind. Because he said, I'm a Midwestern governor. I will do really well in the Midwest states. I will do really well in like the Mid-Atlantic, North Atlantic, kind of East Coast. And the map gets better for me. And if he can't win Wisconsin, there's an argument that maybe the map isn't getting better for him. You know, Maryland, Connecticut, these are all states he said he'd contest, and he needs to actually prove he really can contest them. Because you can't say, I mean, even if he really genuinely believes he can walk in with fewer delegates, he has to walk in with some delegates. He can't just have delegates from Ohio and New Hampshire and Vermont.
So from your sense, is there, I mean, obviously when Kasich talks, he says, I can win, I'm the most electable, well this is, no one's going to get the majority for the convention, I'm going to do well at the convention. He said, I mean, you got to say things like that to stay in the game. But is your perception that Kasich and his staff are actually that delusional and are just proceeding on a path of we're going to win and there's no stopping us? Or is there a plan B in there? Is there, we know we're not going to get the nomination, but if it's brokered, we'll have X amount of delegates and we'll be a player, maybe be VP.
That's not even plan B. That's plan A at this point. I mean, and they've been very open about this. He was telling reporters this in Ohio. He knows he's not winning before the convention. I mean, we all know he's not winning. But
he thinks he can win. He thinks he can win at the convention.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm saying, is there a sense that people inside the campaign know that even that isn't true, but he wants delegates for some other purpose, to be VP or to engineer who a Trump alternative nominee would be?
I don't think anyone's going to ever come out and say, oh, he'd settle for VP, he'd settle for something else. I do think they feel like the convention's in Cleveland, it's on his home turf. He sent a top aide over to basically, like, a longtime top aide of his is now the guy running the convention. And that's a pretty... they've been very tight-lipped about kind of what they will do at a convention, but that's a pretty clear indicator that they are trying to do something at the convention. It's his home state. He'll have some leverage. It's just the question is whether he'll have as much as he seems to think he wants. I wonder if he tries to use it to not, and this is totally conjecture. This is not based on anything they've said, but I wonder if he tries to use it to say, if it's not going to Trump, if it's not going on a first ballot, we can't give it to Cruz either because this man can't win a general election. And maybe he suddenly becomes magnanimous. I would be surprised if... I think Kasich wants the nomination, and I think Kasich thinks he can win the nomination, and I think the fact that... so the one thing I would say about the Kasich campaign is that, to their credit, they have hit for the most... until Utah, but they have laid down markers, and they have hit them. They said they were going to finish strong second in New Hampshire. They finished strong second in New Hampshire. They said they were going to do well in Vermont. They did well in Vermont. They said they were going to be a really strong contender in Michigan. He was slightly behind Ted Cruz, but he was only slightly behind Ted Cruz for third. They said they were going to win Ohio. They won Ohio. So when they lay down markers very clearly, they have been pretty able to meet them. And I think the theory is, none of you believed we could do well in New Hampshire. Look, we did. None of you believed we were going to still be around by Ohio. Look, we are, and we won. So, who are you to say we can't possibly keep going?
I find his general election argument interesting because it's a mirror image of what Bernie Sanders is doing. They both can point to several polls where they are the clear favorites, whether it's Bernie Sanders beats Trump more handily than Hillary does, though they both beat him handily in many polls now. Kasich actually has a better argument. He'd be the only one who can beat Hillary in some of these polls, and Cruz is often tied and Trump is often losing. But in both, in the Democratic side, there is a more clear pushback in maybe more online quarters because the Clinton campaign doesn't regularly engage in it themselves. That you can't trust these numbers because Sanders has been put through the ringer the way Hillary has for decades, and so you're not getting an apples to apples comparison of how they would fare in a general election.
I would take serious issue with the idea that Bernie is a more credible general election contender than Hillary.
So, does that apply to Kasich also? I mean, yes, Trump clearly is obviously weak because of his many transgressions. Cruz is ideologically out of step with a lot of demographics, and he might even be pulling above how he would do once Hellfire came in. Kasich is the relatively moderate choice, but as you note, he's not consistent on the stump. He does lots of goofy things. He makes sense on paper. You know, he has a deep resume. He's governor of a swing state, popular in a swing state, and can be softer on things like Obamacare where the others can't. But he just seems kind of weird a lot of the time. So is there an argument that even his general election numbers really don't speak to how he would fare under the intense pressure that a general election candidate has to deal with?
I think he has a much better case for this than Bernie does, than really anyone does. I mean, I mostly just on Bernie, I think Bernie has no case. I think as soon as anyone lays a hand on Bernie, suddenly everyone's like, oh, socialism. Okay, maybe not. Maybe like the odds write themselves for Bernie. I don't think Bernie could possibly get elected in general. But for Kasich, I think especially given who his competition is, there is a serious argument. He's won in Ohio. He's the only, I mean, Ohio is a swing state, and he won not in a primary. He won multiple general elections for governor. He has like a 66% approval rating, which is obscenely high, especially for a governor who's been away campaigning for president. I mean, you watched Walker's approval rating and Christie's approval ratings just like plummet as they started spending more and more time on the campaign trail. The local newspapers in New Jersey have called for Christie to resign because he was never home. And the fact that Kasich is very high and has stayed really high, like, that's not just Republicans. Ohio's not a 66% Republican state. So
why is that? I mean, hasn't he abandoned his state? Isn't he not really doing his job?
I guess he spent more time in his home state, I guess, than he had an opportunity to spend more time in his home state than, Christie did in New Jersey. New Jersey's not coming up for a while, but I think that shows that he does have more general election appeal. And I think, Cruz just, I think objectively has very little general election appeal. I mean, and his whole argument is against general election appeal. The existence of Cruz's candidacy is founded on the idea that we as a party, Republicans as a party, have always nominated the less conservative candidate in pursuit of a general election. And so we've lost every single time because we never have a candidate who's actually, rallying the base. That we're always looking towards the general election. We're never looking towards actually being conservative, and therefore we screw it up every time. So, Cruz knows he doesn't have general election appeal. He doesn't want to have general election appeal. I imagine, they will try to have more general election appeal, but their whole candidacy is we're going to turn out base. We're going to get Republicans to come out and actually support this guy who normally would stay home because they're like, meh, tepid conservatives, I don't really care.
But have you seen up close? I mean, Kasich seems just congenitally incapable of message discipline. He just goes he meanders a lot. He says things that can be sort of questionable politically. Like he talked about showing his support for Latinos by tipping the maids well. Just little things like that wouldn't play well in a general. I mean, do you see even more of that than maybe the average person sees because you're so up close to him?
The one thing I would say about Kasich, there are the incidents that make the news, the tipping the maids, the I don't have Taylor Swift tickets for you, the women coming out of the kitchen thing. Those are not good. There's just no way around it. Those can be put in ads. Not ideal. That said, I would say, watching him normally, I don't sit there and think, my God, this guy is so off message. He has no idea what he's talking about. He's sort of, I think Ben Gittleson, who's the ABC embed with him, wrote a piece on this. Kasich makes a lot of dad jokes. Kasich is basically your dorky dad really trying hard to be cool. And, that's what it comes off. It doesn't come off as, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. It just comes off as, oh, this is sort of adorable that you're trying so hard, and this is kind of funny. And, it's just, it's him. He sits there, he has this bit about, stealing someone's cell phone no one quite understands, and he threw out, I told you, the covered wagon, which was totally my favorite. He talks about, oh, I don't know where I'm going. I know I'm going everywhere. I've lost track of where I'm going, which, maybe resonates more with a campaign reporter because the first time I heard that, I'd woken up being like, where am I right now? I don't know what state I'm in because I'd been on the road for so long. So I sympathize with not knowing where you're going. But, that's his shtick. He just sort of like, he's dorky, he's awkward. But I think what you saw in New Hampshire, where none of his town halls ever followed a format. I mean, Christie, everyone recycles a little bit of what they're saying. And Christie, I think, is, by comparison, because those were the two that did the most town halls in New Hampshire. A Christie town hall is a masterpiece. I mean, he really, the man can hold a town hall like no one else I've ever seen. But you watch you can watch 3 town halls, and there's maybe a third of it is actually different. He's not reciting the same speech, but he's using the same material. You're hearing the same stories. You're hearing.
He knows exactly what he's doing.
Yeah, exactly. He knows exactly what he's doing. Kasich, there is obviously a lot that is similar, but there's a lot that's like, where did this come from? What is this? But he did well in New Hampshire. He connected in New Hampshire. So clearly there's some sort of everyman type thing with the slouching guy and the clothes that are a little baggy. I don't know, maybe people kind of relate to that.
I want to move towards the prospects for an open convention, as the case of people like to say. They don't like to say brokered. Open convention's the hip term.
Yes.
Do you get a sense that Kasich has really refrained from attacking anybody? He's trying to be Mr. Sunshine all the time.
Yeah. Which is funny because he's always had a reputation as being kind of a mean dude. So this is a new John Kasich.
Would he be Trump's VP? Would he use his delegates to say, if you got to get across the finish line, join with me. You need Ohio anyway. I've never said a lot of mean things about you, so it's not too hard for you. You and Cruz have got all this bad blood. You and I don't. We're a perfect match. Would he take that leap?
So, if I'm remembering correctly, and I lose track of this because I feel like everyone's on a different page every day, but if I'm remembering correctly, he said he would absolutely not be on a ticket with Trump right before Ohio or right after Ohio. There was some comment that Trump made about women, or I want to say Our Principles PAC, which was the anti-Trump group, the very well-funded anti-Trump group that doesn't seem to have made it very far. They were running an ad highlighting all these mean things that Trump had said about women. And Kasich said that had given him pause. And I think a lot of the stuff that happened kind of in the week leading up to Ohio, the riots at rallies and that kind of stuff, Kasich, if I'm remembering correctly, and I could be totally wrong, he said absolutely not.
I think he has said that, but people move off of those kinds of comments sometimes.
I mean, yeah, the problem with VP is you never know. I mean, would you if someone offers the vice presidency to you, do you say no? Probably not. I'm not sure there are a lot of people who would stand so firmly on principle that they'd say, well, I don't like Donald Trump, but absolutely no, I will not be VP. I also, and I said this to you before, I almost feel like the party, if they're going to nominate Trump, which, seems entirely possible, is entirely possible at this point. If he wins it on the first ballot, he'll get it. And even if he doesn't, he may yet get it. He is... I think the best thing people who don't like Trump could have is a VP who knows what they're doing. I think that one of the big knocks on Trump is this is a guy who has never held elected office. He's going to march in there with his, inexperienced and no-name team of foreign policy advisors, and all of a sudden, we're going to be starting World War III because he just, decided to do it and no one told him he couldn't do it. I kind of feel like if you're going to wind up with a Trump presidency, then you need to turn around and if you really, really don't want Trump to be the president, then you need to turn around and say, okay, we're going to put someone in there as VP who's super experienced and can maybe kind of control Trump and exercise some influence and say, no, let me tell you, when I was governor, this is not how it worked. And you want to get a really Republican Senate, you want to get a Republican House, and you want to have all these other institutions that can exercise some sort of check on a guy that you're not totally sure what he's going to do. And so, if Trump wins it, I don't see why Kasich would. I don't know.
I guess
say no on principle, but they should want him to be VP.
Sure. Well, I see a total sense from Trump's vantage point. I guess the deeper question with Kasich is, how ambitious and opportunistic is he? Does he feel like I'm gonna? This is my. If this is Trump's party now, like Chris Christie, I'm going to find my place in it, or does he have a certain sense of principle that Trump is anathema to decency, and I'm not going to sully my reputation by getting anywhere near this guy?
I don't know. My theory on politics, based on nothing any campaign has told me, is that you never underestimate a politician's ego, ever. You know, sure, I think everyone will stand there and take principle stands until they're blue in the face. I really have a hard time seeing one of these guys turning down VP, and that goes for Cruz as well. Cruz might be the exception because Cruz still, he has like he has a while left in the Senate. He'll easily win re-election. Like, he's going back to the Senate. Kasich, his term is ending as governor. Like, he's going to leave at some point. He's going to have to find a new career. I don't know. You know, same with Christie. He's going to leave. He's going to have to find a new career. There's huge amount of ego on
Christie would have a hard time to win a
there.
Senate seat in New Jersey.
Right. I mean, well, Christie's not winning another elected office, I don't think. At least not in New Jersey.
Right.
But, you know, like, if you have enough ego to believe you should be president of the United States, are you really going to turn down the number 2 job? I have a hard time seeing that, regardless of what principle you stood on. But that's, again, my own personal thing and not something any campaign has told me.
Now, I have for a long time, longer than I should have, thought that the Republican establishment would do everything in its power to prevent a guy like Trump or Cruz from getting the nomination. That faith it clearly seems to be misplaced.
Lo and behold, Jeb Bush is endorsing Ted Cruz.
Right.
Like,
well,
who saw that coming?
That's more gumption than a lot of other Republicans. At least he's endorsing somebody who's not Trump. A lot of these guys, even Paul Ryan, can't bring himself to go that far, even when he's trying to be critical of Trump. So
I feel like Paul Ryan is somehow the one person in the party who's in like the hardest spot with all this. Because if he does anything to suggest that he would, I mean, like the reason he is speaker is because he stood up there and said, no, we will include conservatives. I will put Tim Huelskamp on, really influential committees, and we won't kick the people who we disagree with out. Which means if he says anything that can be construed as, no, we're not going to give the nomination to Trump come hell or high water, is not going to do anything good for Paul Ryan, personally.
So my question is, Trump right now, I believe, is on track to win 94% of the delegates that he would need to get the nomination. So not quite a majority, but pretty close. And you're going to have about 200 unbound delegates. Republicans don't have superdelegates the way Democrats do. But you got a handful of places, Colorado, North Dakota, American Samoa, that didn't hold any kind of presidential vote, and so their delegates go totally unbound. And then some of the Jeb delegates and the Rubio delegates will be unbound. And so if the establishment was hell-bent on stopping Trump, it looks like Trump would be a little bit short, and you could muster all of your forces. You could block him on every ballot. But if they're not hell-bent on it, it wouldn't take that many of these unbound delegates to hop over and say, look, the people don't want this. We don't want to have a divided convention. Let's just end this quickly and, let the chips fall where they may in 2016. If it's a disaster, we'll pick up the pieces in 2020. I mean, that latter seems to be what it feels like to me. And in this most recent Bloomberg poll, you saw, I think 63% of Republican voters said, if you have the most delegates but short of a majority, you should get the nomination. So you're not seeing the Republican voters, pound their fist demanding Trump be stopped at all costs. Obviously, there's some faction like that. And I think there's some faction that wouldn't vote for Trump in the general, but it doesn't seem to be a majority faction in the party right now. I mean, is that your sense from where you sit, that there's a lot of fait accompli in Republican quarters about Trump if he is almost all the way there, but not quite? So
I would say 2 things. One, he will have won. I haven't done the math, and I'm not the most... I haven't done the math, so I'm not I agree. It seems like he's gonna be very, very close. The one thing I would say is my colleague Eliana Johnson wrote a really phenomenal piece yesterday saying a contested convention favors Cruz. And part of that is that a lot of states don't bind their delegates to the vote that, to the primary vote. And so that means that, so for instance, Trump won South Carolina, but she pointed this out. Anyone who's a delegate in South Carolina has to be to be a delegate from South Carolina, you have to have been a delegate, I want to say 2 cycles ago. And so, or you have to have been a Republican voter 2 cycles ago. The process by which they select delegates requires you to have been involved 2 years ago or in 2012, which, you know, a lot of, like, Trump's whole kind of deal. I mean, the reason Trump is doing so well is because he's turning out people who haven't been involved. And so in South Carolina, I want to say they find, I'm trying to remember, the rules get really arcane and I don't want to say something wrong.
Well,
but,
they're all bound on the first ballot.
Not all of them are bound on the first ballot. There are some states that don't bind them. But, and there's also the however many delegates at large who are, I'm not quite sure how they're bound. But yeah, so I mean, even, you know, there are people who will be bound on first ballots, but we're already starting the process of wooing everyone for the second ballot. And I think there's some wiggle room in terms of the exact hard number he gets.
I mean, and I know this gets confusing because people interpret the rules differently in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And there'll be lots of rules fights. But you have to want to have a fight. I mean, that's how committed are they?
But I'm of the opinion that if Trump doesn't get it on the first ballot, that he doesn't get it. I just, like, unless he's like 2 votes shy, I just don't see that happening. Like, I think, you know, I think you're going to go to the convention and most people there are going to be kind of establishment people. And like I said, you know, the next part of this to some degree is wooing delegates for the second ballot and saying, you know, support me on the second ballot. You don't want to support Trump. And that means organization. And what we've seen in every, you know, this plays out most clearly in caucus states. Cruz has the best organization in this campaign, period, of anyone left. And Trump has not done well in caucus states. And part of that has been organization hasn't quite, or, you know, maybe the organization's been good. Something is not jiving with the organization and how the campaign is doing things. And so if it comes to a matter of just, like, who can really, like, rouse the most delegates, that seems to me like it's likely to be Cruz.
I mean, beyond South Carolina, I mean, there is, you know, every state has their own processes for deciding who are actually the delegates. And in many cases, they can be party functionaries and not Trump loyalists, even if they are assigned to be a Trump voter on the first ballot.
Exactly.
So
I think most of them will be party functionaries. You know, unless Trump really makes an effort to get his people to the convention.
Right, so there are the seeds for the establishment to band together and stop Trump. So I see what you're saying there. And I'm sure the Trump forces will scream establishment conspiracy riots in the streets if they try something like that. So this is why how willing are the anti-Trump party functionaries willing to withstand the Trump cries of conspiracy and calls for riots? Are they that set on stopping Trump at all costs?
I think we're going to see. I mean, I really feel like this has been a very shifting dynamic for quite some time. You're starting to hear, as you know, so the Florida and Ohio were going to be this last stand, and you know, a lot of donors threw a lot of money at this anti-Trump group that was running ads, blah blah blah, and it didn't go anywhere. And I think in the aftermath of that, I'm starting to hear a little bit more concern that, you know, from Republicans who are against Trump saying, God, I'm starting to hear people say maybe we should just shut up and get in line and, like, focus on the Senate, focus on the House, focus on somewhere else. There was a Washington Post article this morning saying the Koch brothers is thinking maybe, the Koch brothers, like, entity is thinking maybe they'll spend their money on House and Senate races instead. That, like, this is just sort of, you know, out of everyone's hands. And so I think the question is whether that kind of starts, you know, whether that really starts rolling downhill, that, and picking up steam, that, like, people are sitting there and saying, we can't stop him, and we don't, you know, the party's going to break up no matter what. Jonah Goldberg had this great piece yesterday about, you know, the Republican Party, as you know it, is over whether we nominate Trump or don't nominate Trump, because everything's going to just, like, rip in half. So pick a side.
I wrote a piece for the New Republic earlier in the month, the case of shutting down the Republican Party, which was also making a similar point. It's going to divide in half. So why not get ahead of the curve?
Arguably. So pick your team, but that could go one of two ways. That can either have people dig their heels in and say, you know what, this thing's going to hell no matter what, and we're going to stand on principle. Or you can have people say, okay, this is going to hell, but at least like let's not have this really public, terrible fight that violently rips the party in half. Let's just kind of go with it, and we'll set up checks where we can. And I don't know which one happens. It's hard to like. There's been part of the problem with this is there's been so much shifting sentiment along the way. I mean, you hear people say, well, no, I could absolutely never vote for Trump. And then it's like, well, but, if he starts to moderate, maybe, like, it wouldn't be so terrible. Maybe, like, we could get strong advisors around him. And maybe if he stops saying, really insane things about Megyn Kelly, and maybe if he starts kind of, like, actually acting like a grown-up in debates, it'll be fine. And I think that's the problem is, like, there's been this push-pull the entire time of, no, we could never support him. Oh, but if if he's the nominee and we don't support him, he loses, and maybe, he'd be better than Hillary, and, oh, we can never, like, no one knows. And I think a lot of that depends on what Trump does with the next couple of months. I mean, Trump doesn't seem to be able to help himself, so I wouldn't be surprised if this keeps going, but...
Every time he starts to make a general election pivot, he then turns around and, he insults Ted Cruz's wife. It does seem like he doesn't, he can't, I mean, there was a podcast that Howard Dean did with the Huffington Post, the Candidate Confessional, and obviously Dean is not nearly as abominable as Trump in this regard. But he talked about how in Iowa, he kept trying to pivot. He kept trying to be more of a statesman. And then he'd be giving these speeches, and they wouldn't go over well to his fans. His fans wanted the red meat, and you could see the crowd was flat. And then he would just go back into his previous mode to keep his fans excited. And he felt that was his big weakness, that he couldn't. He knew he had to make the pivot, and he found himself he wasn't constitutionally capable of making the pivot.
Yeah, I mean, one of the I can't remember which of the last two debates because they're all starting to blur together. There was this whole spate of articles of this is Trump behaving, Trump is starting to try and behave like the nominee. He's trying to behave presidential. This was like lower energy Trump. He's trying to stay, out of the fray, and really, be a little bit more serious. And it was like, I don't know, within 48 hours or something, he tweeted about Megyn Kelly, or he said something equally, on that level that everyone's like, whoa, what's going on here? And so, yeah, I think he does once in a while try to fit into this mold of what people think you should act like if you're running for president, or what some people think you should act like if you're running for president. And then he almost always swings back. And it hasn't hurt him in votes, but I think for those people who are sitting there and being like, can we get behind this guy? Is this going to be a total disaster? I think a lot of Republicans see the Megyn Kelly tweets and the "I'll spill the beans on your wife, Ted Cruz." Like, no one knows what that means, and that's also like if everyone sort of sits there and they meet Republicans who meet Heidi Cruz sort of sit there, and I've had a lot of them say, "My God, she's really the one who should be running for president." Like, she's a very you don't meet Heidi Cruz and think, "Oh, this is a woman with serious dark secrets in her past." You meet Heidi Cruz and you think, "Wow, like." She's really impressive. She's very good on the stump. It just like every time he kind of calms down, he veers back into the crazy. And I think the question is whether he can calm down for long enough to bring some of the skeptics in the party on board and say, okay, well, at least he'd be better than Hillary. Because there are a lot of people who really don't think he'd be better than Hillary. Or there are a lot of people who think he'd be so bad that, I mean, I've heard people say, I am a lifelong Republican and I will work against Donald Trump if he's the nominee. And, like, that doesn't mean I'm willing to say I'll vote for Hillary, but, like, this man cannot be president. And I don't know where that balance shakes out.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you one last question. I've asked this of Matt, too. Do you get any sense that there is a third-party candidacy in the offing? I mean, if there is going to be one, they'd have to really be starting soon. Either getting the signature or bum-rushing the Constitution Party convention next month. I mean, is there any actual movement towards that, or is it all the Never Trump people just hanging their hopes on blocking him at the convention?
I think I haven't heard a lot about it anymore. I think there was this brief period where it was like, we'll do third party, and now that sort of subsided. I mean, I think the problem is if you do third party, you guarantee a Republican loss. Like, guarantee it. There is, maybe someone like Mike Bloomberg could maybe split the difference, I guess, maybe, but clearly the poll numbers weren't there for him. But you need like someone who's going to be acceptable to the Republican establishment that feels Trump is not conservative enough, or, you know, feels Trump is not presidential enough, is not someone who's probably going to be able to win over a lot of Democrats. And I think there's a lot of trepidation about actively basically working against the party that you say you're trying to protect. That said, you know, who knows what, like, I want to be at the Constitutional Party convention in a month. Like, that seems like a very important place to be at this particular juncture. Right. You have no idea who's going to show up. But you're right. I mean, if there's going to be an independent bid, or any kind of third party bid, there's a lot of money that is going to be involved. And mostly there's just not a lot of people who could do that. Like, you know, Mitt Romney's name comes up a lot, but I think what we saw with Mitt Romney's foray into all of this is that we love Mitt Romney. Like, everyone seems to love Mitt Romney in retrospect. Like, there was that documentary that came out, and everyone sits there and they're like, oh, he was kind of right about Russia, and wow, like, maybe this guy would have been so much better than we all thought he was going to be. But, like, Romney lost, and Romney lost for a reason. You know, Romney didn't lose because Obama was so much, like, Obama clearly was a better campaigner than him, but, like, Romney lost that election fair and square, and for a very good reason, I think, for many good reasons, and, you know, having to do with what he said and how he campaigned, and, you know, we can lionize him in the aftermath, but, like, that doesn't mean if he suddenly comes back on the scene in 2016, everyone's going to be like, oh, thank God, Mitt Romney. Like, Ted Cruz is a very direct reaction to Mitt Romney. Ted Cruz is, you know, we always nominate the kind of moderate squish. We always nominate Mitt Romney, and look, he loses. So you should nominate me this time. Like, I don't think there's I'm not sure there's anyone who could come in and suddenly rally the troops and be like, oh yeah, no, this guy would be so much better. Yeah, let's go with him. Like, I just don't think that person exists.
Interesting commentary for a party that said they had such a deep bench only a year ago.
Well, I mean, there is a deep bench. It's just the bench has been, like, dead and buried after 6 months. Like, Scott Walker was supposed to be, like, the guy, and Scott Walker was out in, 3 months? Also, Ted Cruz, who, I mean, just, like, I would say nothing about this election has shaped up the way anyone thought. And I actually, not to, like, keep plugging National Review articles, but my other colleague, Tim Alberto, wrote this great piece. He interviewed David Axelrod about why Rubio, the Rubio-Obama comparison was not accurate, like why Rubio's kind of star never quite materialized. That's really interesting in terms of just sitting there and thinking we were all so sure that Rubio, you know, had the best shot, was going to be kind of the strongest candidate, and that is absolutely the opposite of what materialized.
Yeah, lots of good commentary at the National Review. Even if you're a liberal, you know, there's a lot of analysis there that is not.
It's interesting.
You know, yeah, I mean, it's not all right wing polemics. They got a lot of just deep analysis on what's going on the Republican side, and most importantly, your commentary, Alexis Levinson at the National Review. Where can people find your stuff, and where are you going to be the next few weeks on the campaign trail?
Ooh, interesting question. I might go to next 2 weeks. I don't know. It's gonna be an adventure. I'll let you know when I figure it out. Do you get to this? Is it up to you? Do you get to pick your states? It's mostly up to me, but we're reaching this nice slow period of the nominating process where I may actually get to live in this apartment I pay rent in for a little bit.
There's no hope of going to Hawaii or Alaska.
Oh, dare to dream. That's, you know, there's Katie Zezima at the Washington Post is the only reporter that I know of who pulled off a trip to the Virgin Islands for this campaign. She wrote this whole piece about, like, Ted Cruz's island strategy, and I have to say, like, she's doing it better than the rest of us. Man, that would be great. Like, why didn't I think that far in advance? So, we'll see. I don't know. I'll be somewhere. It'll be fun.
Excellent. And for folks who are curious, I have launched a new podcast last night. For those who are fans of my old podcast, the Liberal Oasis radio show with my co-host Tracy Olson, we have returned for a new podcast called Talk Me Down, a Liberal Oasis podcast for anxious liberals, where we try to assuage people's concerns about what lies ahead. So you can find that at liberaloasis.com. And hopefully we can get you back on before the convention, because I'm sure there's going to be oodles to talk about between now and then.
Oh boy, definitely.
Thank you so much, Alexis Levinson, and thank you for listening to the DMZ. Check us out at blogins.tv and also the podcast version on iTunes, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks so much.